All right, welcome to the Bryce Eddy Show. Hey, so today my guest is a return guest. I've been wanting to have this guy on for a part two, Mason Mennenga. So Mason and I have had some fun time arguing, maybe debating, hitting each other online a little bit. He's got a big voice on Twitter, the artist formerly known as Twitter, and he and I disagree with a bunch of things, and so it makes for some lively time. But he, unlike most on what I would say maybe the progressive side of things, don't like to come on shows like mine and have honest conversations. So I applaud him for that. Mason, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you and I, we got hung up on a few things on the last show that took up a lot of time. We talked, and the audience could go back and listen to it, but we talked about self-defense in the home and things that you and I saw very, very differently. I thought it was fascinating, but I wanted to, chat with you about a few other things that were still on my list. But what's been, kind of on your mind lately? What have you been hammering after people on?
Yeah, what has been on my mind lately? Yeah, I guess in terms of like books that I've been reading, podcasts that I've been listening to, I've been really interested in panpsychism.
Okay.
So I've been diving more into that. And it's a topic that I've definitely explored a little bit. I actually wrote a little bit about it in my thesis a few years back. But yeah, I have been wanting to explore panpsychism a little bit more. So yeah, I've
All
been
right.
diving
Well,
into
let's talk
that.
about
So
what
yeah.
that even means for the audience, because I'm not sure I even know what that means.
Yeah, so panpsychism is basically the philosophy that what is fundamental to reality is consciousness. So, a lot of I would call them materialists, people who believe that what is existence is just based on just the physical material that exists. And panpsychists would argue that actually even more fundamental, or if you dig a little deeper, it's actually consciousness that makes up everything. And so, yeah, that's essentially what panpsychists believe.
Okay. I mean, now when you say that, I think of it in terms of Christianity, and I think about it being God's consciousness that exists and holds everything together. So how would you say that would be different from that point of view?
Yeah, I mean, certainly panpsychists aren't exactly theists, but there are some that are theists, and so it's
Right.
not a explicitly atheist or theist position. It's sort of agnostic to theism. However, I personally am under the assumption that it does open up, at least philosophically, this possibility of theism, or at least one particular kind of theism. And so, I think it's interesting for that reason, or that's one of the reasons why I think it's interesting. So, yeah, I think that it certainly opens up that possibility of theism, whether it's Christian theism or some other kind of theism. But yeah, I think that's certainly a possibility. But yeah, there certainly are atheist panpsychists out there in the world. But at the end of the day, what it would argue is that that what we know to exist in the world isn't just a bunch of like physical materials or physical
Right.
properties. There is something more. There's something deeper to that, and I find that to be a really particularly intriguing argument. That when, for example, Bryce, when you experience love with maybe a friend or a spouse or whoever it might be, that love that you're experiencing isn't just a bunch of chemical reactions that are happening in your brain. Maybe there is something more to that. Than just simply a bunch of chemical reactions. And so I think panpsychism is starting to make that argument that whatever we experience in the world isn't just fundamentally a bunch of chemical or physical reactions or
Sure.
properties, but there's something actually a little deeper there.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so
I
I
mean,
find that to be a really interesting argument.
that certainly would be consistent with the Christian worldview. Now,
100%.
for the audience, and actually, I should explain why I have the most gnarly bandage on. I talked to you about it before we jumped on, but I'm going to post all of these grotesque pictures of them tearing into my forehead to get rid of some cancer that I let go for far too long. But that's why I have this bandage, and I'll have this bandage for another 48 hours, and then I'll have a Frankenstein level scar for a little while before all that heals up, and then I'm beautiful again. So Anyway, now I want you to explain, and I know you don't, maybe you're uncomfortable with labels, but you and I went at it in regards to Christianity because you're a
Mhm.
former evangelical, for lack
Mhm.
of a better term,
Mhm.
and still hold to the truths of the Bible. Although I think you you and I disagree on a bunch of those things there. But give the audience a quick bio background again for those that didn't listen to part one.
Yeah, I grew up in what I would consider to be kind of the heart of evangelicalism. I grew up in South Dakota. In fact, like I know the Christine Nome family very, very well. And so, yeah, grew up kind of in that area of South Dakota. And yeah, grew up in prototypical evangelicalism. The first songs I remember as a child were VeggieTale songs, and grew up going to church on Sundays and Wednesdays, and did all of that. Was very involved in my youth group, went on mission trips. Did all the very prototypical evangelical, youth group, church culture in the 2000s. Whatever was going on in 2010s in youth group culture, that's what I was involved in. I was deep in the heart of it. So yeah, went did all of that. It was probably starting my senior year of high school that I started having some kind of questions around politics and my faith, and yeah, just starting to have think about my faith kind of on my own terms and not just simply what I was given. And went to a small conservative evangelical college because I wanted to be a youth pastor. So I figured I go to this college. I was able to play football. They offered me a scholarship, and then I was also able to be a youth ministry major. So I was like, well, I guess that's set for me. So went there, and that's when I really started to dive deeper in my faith. Learning more about the Bible, not just reading the Bible, but learning about the Bible, how it came to be, learning the context of it, learning about theology, how theology has developed over the last 2,000 years. All of that was just fascinating to me. I'd never learned or knew about any of that, and really changed my faith in a lot of ways. And so I realized, oh, I don't necessarily have to be an evangelical. Evangelicalism doesn't have a monopoly on Christianity. There's lots of ways that I can be a Christian in the world. And so that was really, really helpful for me as I went through college. And so, yeah, we did all of that, went to start working at a church in Minneapolis after I graduated, started seminary, started posting a lot on Twitter and starting a podcast and doing all of that. So but yeah, that's kind of my background and how I got to here.
All right. So now, when you say evangelical, what do you mean by that? And because you said, okay, evangelical doesn't have a monopoly or whatever.
Mhm.
What do you even mean by evangelical? Because those terms change over time. I mean, back when I was
For
growing
sure.
up, it
Yeah.
was everybody was born again, and
Yep.
over time it eventually became some kind of slur, or some kind of negative term, and then everybody pivoted to something else.
Right. Right.
All right, hey, I'm no I'm yes, I'm born again, but I'm an evangelical, and it all essentially meant the same thing. But what do you mean when you say evangelical? How do you define it, and tell me about that monopoly?
Yeah. So evangelical began several couple hundred years ago, where initially it really began as a Protestant movement, where it really emphasized like personal conversion. So you mentioned just a second ago the born again. So it really emphasizes that born again experience. So it really emphasizes that personal conversion. And one of the other things that probably is maybe most known for, in comparison to maybe other Christian traditions, is a high emphasis of biblical literalism. And so it really wants to emphasize that it takes the Bible literally. There's some maybe there's a thing called the Bebington, I think is how you pronounce it. The Bebington, I think it's called the quadrilateral or something like that. But it has maybe a couple other kind of characteristics, but those are probably maybe the most two well-known characteristics that really distinguish evangelicalism from other Protestant traditions. However, so that's how it began, and I think more or less like those are two things that it really continues to emphasize. It was more so in the 20th century that it really became more adopted towards having a political characteristic as well, where it became very known for its political advocacy, obviously being very conservative. And so this is where you start seeing the rise of the religious right being very much an evangelical movement. And so evangelicalism started to become more characterized by the religious right, the Christian right. And so that has been a huge part of its history now. It didn't initially necessarily start out as that, but now that is definitely probably maybe the most key characteristic of its history is over the last 50, 60 years. It's known as a very like a conservative political movement. Again, still emphasizes this sort of personal conversion experience and biblical literalism, but it certainly is also characterized more so now by being kind of a political movement.
Now, one of the things I would characterize you with, and especially some of your online arguments, is with literalism, because you take things literally that are meant figuratively and take things, out of context routinely. And I don't know sometimes if you're doing that to, to get a rise out of people, or doing it in a tongue-in-cheek manner. But I've taken issue with you on some of those things. You seem to selectively do that when it benefits you. Are you getting, just trying to get a rise out of people, or what's your MO there?
No, I mean, I think, and this is what was really helpful for me as I went to college and started taking courses on the Bible, going to seminary and taking courses on the Bible, is I started to realize a lot of the things that I was told that had to be taken literally actually weren't meant to be taken literally at all. And then many of the things that I was told, that might be considered more figurative, probably actually doesn't need to be taken that literally. And then I realized, like, wait, like, why are we not taking that part literally? So yeah, I think one of the things that I've realized, and especially growing up in evangelicalism and believing a lot of the things that a lot of the people that get mad at me used to believe, or that I used to believe those things, and I've realized that, like, when it comes to, let's say, the Genesis 1 creation story, like, as I've learned from biblical scholars and people who know a lot about the Bible, that's just simply, like, it is a very poetic narrative, and it was never taken literally up until probably the early 19th century, when we have this rise of fundamentalism. And so it was that point that we realized, especially as a response to Darwinian evolution theory, like, oh, that's now we're going to start taking this literally, and when it never was before. And so it's things like that where I realize, oh wait, I don't have to take that literally, and I can still learn a lot about the Bible. I can learn a lot about God and the world through the Genesis 1 creation narrative, but I don't have to necessarily believe that it's some sort of scientific account. Whereas, when you take a look at, like, the Sermon on the Mount, or when Jesus says that he came to liberate the oppressed, for some reason, that's when it becomes, oh, that's Jesus just meant the spiritually oppressed. And it's like, well, why can't I actually just take the literal words actually literally, when he talks about that? So it's things like that where I realize, oh, there are a lot of things that I was told to believe that were supposed to be taken literal, that I realize now just through learning about the Bible is, no, those have never been taken literal, and they weren't meant to be taken literally. And then there's some things where I was told, no, that's actually a spiritual thing, or that's just a metaphor. And it's like, well, why can't I just take that literally? So I guess that's kind of where
Okay,
maybe we disagree
fair
on a lot of
enough.
things.
Yeah, fair enough. Because sometimes it seems like you're playing with people, and I
I
pick
mean, I
that
do
up a
like
little
to
bit.
mess around with people, like, oh, no,
Yeah,
I'm actually a biblical literalist. Like, I'm trying to take these words from Jesus actually literally.
yeah. I mean, sometimes I think you do that in a better way than others, because sometimes it's confusing as to, like, okay, is this guy just nuts, or is he trying to get a rise out of people? And I respect people who are trying to get a rise out of people, but I mean, here's my perspective on that. I think this is a fair perspective. The Bible, one of my favorite pastors says it should be taken naturally, which means that, obviously God created the, tools of poetry. God created, figurative expressions and literal expressions, and all of the above. And so we are to take those things, given that whole context of what he's communicating to us. And I think where we try to go too far one way or the other, when it's not intended one way or the other, is where we err. And so I think it's a fair approach to, spend time, and that's where discernment comes in, to look at these things. I'll give you an example. Yes, when Jesus spoke on the Sermon on the Mount, he did mean the spiritually oppressed, but he also meant the oppressed. And I think two things can be true.
For sure.
However, where I take issue with you on a bunch of things is how you define the oppressed, or how you define the wealthy, or when you talk about, because you will rail against the wealthy on a regular basis, and I think you take some of that stuff in the wrong way. And I'm not sure if you do it intentionally or if it is based in some envy, because certainly there are rich people that go to heaven, and there are rich people in the Bible that God used because of their wealth, and they blessed other Christians because of their wealth, and all of that is and I think you intentionally are unfairly attacking people who have means, and I don't think you do a good job in defining, or expressing what the Bible really says about the wealthy.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably lots of ways that we can, try to figure out what exactly is wealthy, and maybe there is some sort of absolute line where if you're just on the other side of it, you're not, and if you're just on the other side, you are. I don't know that
No, but I mean, it wouldn't be
that part.
that
I'm
wealth.
less interested in that. But what I can say is,
Yeah.
if somebody has more than what they need and somebody doesn't, like that to me is just fundamentally a problem. And I think what Jesus does a lot throughout the Gospels is tries to pull out and point out the fact that it is actually unjust when somebody has well more than they need and somebody doesn't have what they need, and that to me is like fundamentally wrong. And I think as followers of Jesus, we should do whatever we can to make right that wrong.
Okay, yeah, but but that's where I would love to hear you define what that means, because if there is a person in need, I am characterized as a very generous person, and I've been blessed, and um, I've been blessed financially. I'm a wealthy guy by all kinds of standards, and I am incredibly generous with both my obligatory and commanded of me responsibilities, so my tithes and my contributions and all that stuff, and then going over and above for people in need on a regular basis. And again, that I would be characterized by with independent witnesses.
Right.
And so if there is somebody in need, I'm there and ready to help. And I also, I mean, while I'm sure there's times that I fall short of this, but the commands in Scripture, when it surrounds people, is that we should not love money, and money should not be replacing God. Money should, and the pursuit of money should not be replacing God and those responsibilities. And I think that the Scripture could not be more clear on that. And again, in some of your tweets, it seems that you take it, very much out of context when you want to, in regards to that.
Yeah, I just like for again, let's talk about billionaires. I
Right.
just don't see there any way for anyone to become a billionaire without loving money. Like I can't imagine accruing so much wealth that I mean someone like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, they make more money than they could possibly even think about spending or giving away per second. I mean, they are making so much money that they couldn't even possibly give it away fast enough, right? That to me, like that's like the fact that we've created a society where that's possible to me is just fundamentally wrong. Now we can argue about whether or not we think capitalism is the best way to address that or socialism or whatever it is. But I think
And we can get into
fundamentally,
that
I
if
think
you
it's
want.
wrong that somebody is making more money than they could possibly even give away. And I just think that there's
Yeah,
no
but
way
they're
to argue
also
that that person doesn't love money. That person
yeah,
loves
but they
so much
also
money that they can't
lifted.
even
They
give away it
also
fast enough.
Yeah, but they also lifted in those companies, and we'll take Elon Musk specifically, because I know firsthand of people in low level Tesla positions that have become fabulously wealthy themselves and remained in relatively low level positions. He has, blessed people financially around him. He has lifted people, into wealth through even Tesla stock, and other folks have benefited, including the hundreds of thousands of people that he's employed, or the things that he has done that are innovative and all that stuff. And yes, a capitalist society rewards that. Show me something different than that, where it would work to lift people out of poverty. Show me something better than that, and we have a discussion. And the fact is that no one really can. Now, capitalism can be corrupted, and right now I would argue, and I do routinely on the show, that we do not have free market capitalism here. We have a corporatist, oligarchical, bastardization of it now that we need to reset. And that's why I'm in the political side of the world that I'm in. And that's why I condemn the oligarchs. But show me something in a there is no pure form of capitalism possible, because human beings are involved. There is no pure form of socialism or communism possible because human beings are involved. And all you get in socialist situations or communist situations is just people who are powerful and wealthy, and you just get fewer of them controlling what we do. So, what would be, Mason, your ideal in a fallen, sinful world?
Yeah, I would argue that I mean, just the stats are very clear that the amount of wealth is becoming more and more concentrated to less and less people. And so when you just made this argument that,
Why
like,
is that, though?
the powerful, especially, and I'm not arguing against this, there have been communist governments that where, yeah, the powerful becomes more and more concentrated to less and less people. 100% agree. That's the reason why I'm there's a reason why I'm an anarchist.
Yeah, and we've talked about that a little.
However, right, and we talked about that before. So what I would argue is, okay, yeah, that happens in communist governments. I would say that it happens in, and again, obviously you're saying that we don't have a pure capitalist society, but even so, like, we're probably closer to that than we are to some sort of communist society, right?
Oh,
So
for sure.
I would say that the fact that, like, wealth is becoming more and more concentrated to less and less people is fundamentally a wrong thing. And especially when we're seeing homelessness in America is rising. So the fact that homelessness and people are becoming less and less financially sustainable, that's happening. Just saw a thing the other day that 60% of Americans don't have enough to have what they consider a quality life. That's the majority of Americans, right? So that's happening while also somebody is, probably now the richest person of all time, at least more in a modern times. Like, that is all happening at the same time. And I would just say, regardless, again, whether one's a capitalist or a socialist or whatever, I just think fundamentally, from learning about Jesus, that is fundamentally a problem where somebody is getting more and more powerful with more and more money, while other people are experiencing homelessness, and the quality of life for the majority is becoming less and less. I just
Okay,
think that's
well,
fundamentally a wrong thing.
I,
Like,
I'm
something,
I'm
it is. I think it shows us that there is something fundamentally wrong with the way that we've created our
yeah,
world.
but I mean, you and I have common ground there. There is something fundamentally wrong.
Right.
So, but the question is, what is fundamentally wrong? Because what I said earlier is we have a globalist corporatism that is really running the world now, not a free market capitalist society, right? We need to decentralize things, which you as an anarchist could probably agree with me more than not on this. We need more power to be in the hands of the individuals. We need to break down the system that is in place. But what I think maybe you're missing, and I say this with love and respect to you, is that we got there by the growth of governmental authorities interfering, right, and regulatory bodies interfering in private enterprise and free markets and manipulating the markets in favor of those wealthy people, those oligarchs, the people that are on top, which happens in every form of government somebody works hard to accumulate power. In a capitalist society, you at least have a fighting chance to come from nothing and fight your way up, versus in a society where it's all predetermined, which happens a lot in communist or socialist societies. You're either in the party or you are not. It does not emphasize the individual; it's collectivism. And as an anarchist, you should agree with me that the system needs to be at least broken down to a certain extent.
100%.
Maybe not as much as, I probably would disagree with the amount that you'd like to see that, but we're really arguing about centralized control versus decentralized control.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with that. Yeah, again, for me, fundamentally, when I look at somebody who, let's say, is a capitalist, right? Like Elon Musk, the point of being a capitalist is trying to gain as much capital as possible. And again, I just fundamentally think that there is something wrong with that. Again, I think to be a capitalist means that you do love money. And as we talked about, we think that that's a sin, right?
Well,
Bible seems
well, but
pretty
let
clear
me,
about that.
yeah,
Right? And
uh,
I look at like the early church, right? In Acts 2, the first thing that these people did once they started following Jesus, and as soon as Jesus ascended, first thing they started doing was they shared everything in common. They didn't have this pursuit of somebody needs to make as much capital as possible. No, they all decided we're going to share everything that we have in common. And what if we just created a world like that? I just think, again, whether you call that
yeah, that
socialism
was
or capitalism
voluntary
or
though.
whatever, I think the early church gives us a really clear example of how we could create a world where clearly the first followers of Jesus thought that that was the thing that they should do in following Jesus.
Okay, yeah, but that was voluntary. And
For
see,
sure. Yeah.
what
I
you're
don't,
saying is
again, there's
let's
a reason why I'm an
create.
anarchist. I don't think somebody should be going.
Fine.
What I think we should create disciples, right? Let's use that language. We should create disciples where when somebody grows up in the faith, all they can think about is looking at the world and saying, this is how we should operate the world, where everybody has enough. Everybody has enough. Nobody has too much. Nobody has too little. Everybody has enough. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm so like, there's a reason why I'm still a Christian is I think Christianity has something to offer there, that we actually can create a world because we're following Jesus where we say everybody can have enough and we're going to share everything we have in common. But we don't need some sort of government entity to come down with a gun and force us to do that. We can just create disciples following Jesus. And I think following Jesus and a love of God is compelling enough. We don't need a government to do that.
Well, okay. I do respect what you're saying and the idealism that is behind it. The problem is it is idealism, because as long as there is sin,
Well, I think the
um,
kingdom of God, I know we went back on this before, but
yeah,
I think the kingdom of God is pretty idealistic. But guess what? It's here,
yeah,
but not yet.
of course, but yeah, but until sin is gone from the world, we aren't going to have that wonderful
I
vision
mean, the
that you
early church did
described there.
it. The early church did it. Why can't we? They did
Well,
it
why?
2,000 years ago. Why can't we today?
Well, why aren't we still doing it? Set
I
upon
think a
that
lot of church
example.
communities do. I just saw a thing about a couple months ago where a church paid off all of the medical debt in its congregation. Like that's
Yeah.
something I'm like, why I want to see more churches do that. Less building funds, and let's actually start.
Well, I think there's more
Yeah.
churches than you believe that are doing
Oh, there are
incredibly
like, and again, I
terrible
think
things
there
like
are
that.
churches, and I
Yeah,
think we need
and
to
we're called to
continue to
that.
do that. Yeah,
And
yeah. I think we need to do that more and more.
yeah, you and I would both rail against the church building fund drives and things like that in the same way. I mean, I think you can do some of that stuff responsibly. Don't get me wrong, but I
For
think
sure.
I mean, church I helped plant here has been meeting in a tent, and we all had to come together to get us a bigger tent, and we had to raise money for that sort of stuff to make it through the winter. I mean, we're on a big ranch, and it's and we're literally meeting in a tent. So a building would be nice, and there's nothing
Yeah,
wrong
and
with
again, I'm
everybody
not
coming
railing
together for
against
that.
that, but there are churches, and you and I both know there are churches where they're spending their money what we would probably consider irresponsibly, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And where
100%.
instead they could actually be helping the people in their community. These churches could be helping one another in their community or outside of their community. It doesn't matter. But yeah, like that's the kind of church I want to see in the world, and I want to see more and more of that. And I also think, again, fundamentally, at the end of the day, if somebody is experiencing probably the greatest amount of wealth that we've seen in the world, and we're also experiencing increased rates of homelessness, there's just something fundamentally wrong with that, right?
Yeah, let
And
me
I
let
think
me
the church has something to offer to say, this is actually how the world can operate, that we can have, everybody can have enough. I
yeah,
think the church can show that.
let me hit you with something that might you may not believe, but I have seen some of this a little bit more personally, being in and around the Elon Musk apparatus. Elon Musk does not love money.
I
Elon
just don't
Musk,
know how you possibly could make that argument if he's literally making more money than he could possibly ever even spend. Like, that is just, there's no way to argue that this person
well,
doesn't
sure there is,
actually want to hoard
but
wealth or is in love with money.
money is a tool, and that guy has been anything but a hoarder of it. In fact, that guy
He
has
has the
risked
most that's
he has
ever
risked
happened.
it.
Like, we've never seen anybody have
Yeah,
that
but
much money before. That's
that's beside the
absolutely
point.
hoarding.
He's been rewarded by taking incredible risks, but that guy has been to the point of pushing all of the chips in multiple times. And I don't know around how many obscenely wealthy people you've been around, but they just don't do that. And
Yeah,
Elon Musk
unfortunately, I
has.
don't. Growing up
Yeah,
in South
Elon
Dakota,
Musk.
I just know a lot of people that just have enough and are getting by. And
Yeah.
I'm actually really comfortable with. I love the fact that I actually don't know any millionaires or billionaires. Like, it's actually kind of been a
Well,
blessing
you
for
know
me,
one.
to be honest.
You know one.
Great. And
I
I
mean,
again, I just
but being a millionaire ain't what it used to be. That's for sure.
well, that's true,
Um,
right?
yeah,
Because you got people like Elon Musk that can't even spend enough money
yeah,
that he's making.
but do you understand what I'm saying? And I would like to
Like,
challenge you on this.
I
This is a
understand the
guy who has
mechanics. I
risk.
understand the mechanics of how he's done this, and, I understand, like, yeah, there's a lot of risk. He's putting a lot of money in, making a lot of risk, and
Yeah,
has been
but no,
greatly
no, no, no,
rewarded,
no,
as
no.
you would say. But again, like, this guy is making more money than he could possibly spend in multiple lifetimes, and, like, he's literally making more money a second than I'll ever make in my entire life.
Yeah,
And
but his bets aren't. Did you
I just
understand,
don't see that as a healthy way to
Mason?
create the world.
Hold up a minute. But you understand, and I hear what you're saying, okay? But let me challenge you on something. The guy has demonstrated, and he is not a Christian. We're not, he doesn't claim to
Yeah,
be a
yeah.
Christian. I'm not claiming he's Christian. I'm not claiming he's on the way to faith. I'm not anything like that.
Right.
But the guy's drive is not based on money, and it is not based on
Then
the
why
love of
is that
money
literally the thing that he's making the most out of? Like, most
because
of every
because
ever. Like, if his drive is to have more kids, he's doing that a lot too. But,
sure,
like,
that's one of
what
them.
if
His
his
drive is
drive is
to,
to be the most
populate the
generous person in the
planet
world? Again,
and put people
he's
on Mars.
literally can't even give away enough money. Like, I don't understand how the argument could be that he
Yeah, well,
doesn't love
he's
money.
given away, obscene amounts of wealth too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And guess what? He's still making more money than he could possibly ever even give away.
Yeah, but I mean, he's gotten to the point of, I mean, for you even, buying, Twitter, at a tremendous loss, which he did. Now, arguably over time, it might be the greatest investment he ever made, but he did it because he also saw, and this is well documented. The story is a wonderful and thrilling story to read, and read his biographies or listen to them. Walter Isaacson does a pretty good job on it. But he took himself multiple times to the point of potential bankruptcy. I mean, if the rocket, the last rocket blew up, at one point in SpaceX, he said, "Hey, if this one fails, we're all done," because he literally put everything he could and mortgaged his entire existence into making that rocket work. Not because he wanted to make money, but because he wanted to put people on Mars. I mean, the guy is, again, I'm not arguing that he's a
I wish I
Christian
had
because
the kind
he's
of money
not.
where I'm just, my pet project is the thing that I can actually fund. Like, that would
Yeah,
be
but
awesome.
but
That would be
but
great, right?
Mason, maybe you're the type of guy that has, given away every last dime over and over again, or bet the farm on things over and over again, because you can do that at an obscene level of wealth and risk everything. to the point where you're going to have nothing left, or you can do it when you've got $100 in your pocket and you decide to give it to the, homeless guy as you're walking down the street, and that's the last of your wealth. And both of those people can at the same time just say, you know what, I'm not about money. And I would posit that although he has been rewarded by financial risks, if you come away with anything in getting to understand Elon Musk, the man, he is not a money motivated guy.
Well, that's pretty impressive given the fact that he's now become the richest person in human history, at least in modern history. Like
Yeah,
that
now I wouldn't say
the
that
fact
about
that
Jeff
the fact that
Bezos.
you can become that without actually liking the thing, that is pretty impressive. Like
Yeah, but
that's like
we're
saying like,
arguing.
the number 1 draft pick in the NFL doesn't actually really like football. Like, wow, that's pretty impressive that you can become the greatest football, that's like saying Tom Brady didn't like football even though he got
Okay,
divorced
but
because of
yeah,
it.
but there's countless examples of that all over the place, of people who pursue something because they like what it brings them over here, but they don't like it, or they pursue something as a means to an end. I mean, that can be true all over the place, brother.
Yeah, and I would say just fundamentally, there's no way to say that you can become the richest person in the world without kind of being like, yeah, I'm sort of into the actual money making thing to it. Because here's the thing, like I would make the argument that if he really truly wasn't in it for the money, he would just stop. He would just stop at some point. Like it would be too much. But no, he continues to invest in things. And yeah, maybe there's some greater thing of wanting to get people on Mars or whatever his thing
He's
is,
got a whole
right?
bunch
Like
of those kind of
right,
motivations that
whatever.
are.
Like
He's a true kind of genius innovator that wants to see humanity do, unbelievably ambitious things. He's an unbelievably ambitious guy. I mean, I don't see why
there's no doubt about
that
that.
is something that you would argue has to be. Money's just a tool for people who have ambition at that level where they want to accomplish things. And again, I'm not arguing about his morality on anything. I'm just saying that how do you, Mason, square up that I know people that are like that are very wealthy, that are also very generous, that do not love money, which is what the command around money is, we aren't to make it our God. It's the love of money that's the root of all evil, not money itself. And so you're arguing that you have to absolutely love money if you're wealthy. That's
Yes,
basically what you're saying.
yeah, to become a
Yeah.
billionaire, there's no other way to become that without
Only a
absolutely
billionaire.
loving money. Like they have the same drive to love money as Michael Jordan had to
What
winning
what if
NBA
you're just a
championships.
half a billionaire? I mean, what's the limit? I honestly think is an
Yeah, I would
absurd
say half
argument.
a billionaire. That seems pretty likely. I do again, like it comes down to, and again, there could be poor people that want, there could be some college grad that now is wanting to get into venture capitalism or whatever. That's a person that loves money, right? Even
Yeah,
if they
well,
don't have that money right now,
I've seen
the fact
poor
that they
people
want to
that
have
love
that
money
is a
more than the wealthy people I know.
what's that?
I've seen poor people that love money
I'm sure.
10,000
Yeah.
times more
Yep.
than the wealthy people I know.
Yep. And I would say at the end of the day, there's no way fundamentally. I just fundamentally believe that if you're a billionaire, it's because you love money. It's simple as that. It's because you love money. There's no way around it for me.
Yeah, I think honestly, brother, that's rooted in a little bit of envy, which
I'll be
according to the
honest
Bible
again,
is
like
also sin there.
I've never you're probably the first millionaire I've ever talked to be honest. Um and I seriously I've thought about this so many times in my life. I just want like a 3-bedroom house would be nice. Like being able to have nice food every once in a while, like that seems like something I would value. But that's about it. Like that would be nice. But like if I could just retire at 65 like most people and just have like a nice retirement, go on a vacation once in a while, like that quality of life, that seems fine. But I
Yeah,
don't
but
need a
by
billion
the
dollars.
world's standards,
Like
that's
I really don't need $1 billion. Like I don't need
by
much
the
more.
no, no, but that's fine. But that's you, that's great. But by the
Right,
world's
yeah, and
standard,
it's because I
that's
don't
very
love money,
wealthy.
like, I don't like, I it's
Right.
not envy that somebody has $1 billion, like, I actually whatever issues that are caused because Elon has $1 billion, like, I actually don't want that at all, like, I
Sure.
think it creates a corrupt human being, and has clearly caused a lot of issues in his own life, and I just, like, I don't want that. I think, like, a nice 3-bedroom house, white picket fence kind of thing, like that's more than enough for me. That seems like a nice, happy life. And I don't think that's an envy of somebody who is a billionaire. Like, I don't think somebody just wanting enough to have a good quality life, that is in any indication that they love money.
Yeah, but what you described is wealthy. What you described by the world
I mean,
standards is
60% of
wealthy.
Americans probably have that, and yet it's still like it's still not exactly the high
Measured
quality of
against the
life.
world, and it's and you're and that is
Certainly,
incredibly
right?
wealthy. So I mean, my point, brother,
Yeah,
is
and
that
guess what? Those people too, I want them to be able to have that quality of life too. I don't want somebody to
sure.
have so much money that they can't even give away fast enough. Like, that's what I'm saying. There are a lot of people in the world that yeah, I probably am wealthy in comparison to them. And guess what? I want them to have that same kind of quality of life as me. And guess what? I actually want Elon Musk to just have a normal ass life like me too. Like,
Yeah, but if you
I
did,
don't want him to be able to have so much money and he's making so much money that he can't even give it away fast enough. Like, I want all none of us to have that kind of power and capacity.
yeah, but if none of us have that kind of power and capacity, then we even being stewards of the earth? Because being part of being a steward of the earth is teasing out God's creation, like inventing air conditioning. And the guy who invented air
You
conditioning
don't
became a
think
wealthy
people
man.
before
Um,
wealth, like, you don't think like someone before Elon Musk, for example, like there weren't people that were just trying to create things like the first humans were creating things. Like we are going to create regardless of whether or not there's the potential to become a billionaire. Like people are going to create things regardless, right? So like I just like I don't buy the argument that the only way people are incentivized to create things is to become massively wealthy.
oh no, I don't think so.
People are
I'm
naturally
not
creative
arguing that.
people, and they're going to do that, right? So
I'm not
I just
arguing
don't
that,
buy
but
that
in a
argument because I hear
socialist
that argument all the time.
Yeah, but in a socialist or communist environment, you don't get that. You don't get great, now you do. You get some oppressed music, which half the some of the great classical musicians came out of communist Russia. So you do get certain things because the human beings are creative, and that is a God breathed
For
attribute.
sure.
But you're suggesting, and I'm certainly not. You're suggesting that the only argument that you're hearing is that the only motivation comes from money, and no, it doesn't. People, inventors, all the time are driven by in that inherent God breathed creativity to innovate and to figure things out.
Absolutely.
But there is a financial reward or aspect of it for many of them, not all of them, but many of them want that white picket fence and to retire at 65, and so they're working hard at that rather than uh, you know repairing roofs, and so they're doing what they can to get there, and then along that path they hit something, right time, right right opportunity, and then they're wealthy and rewarded beyond
Mhm.
the white picket fence. And what you're suggesting is what you deem to be enough according to Mason should be enough according to everyone. So
Correct.
what would you put in a society, an artificial cap on it all? Hey, you have enough
I've
now,
actually
brother, stop.
I mean, again, I'm not a if I were to be a person that was a proponent of the state, I do think actually we should have the opposite of a minimum wage and have something where it's a maximum wage, where you just can't make more than X amount of money without it being fully 100% taxed or something. And I actually think that we shouldn't have maybe necessarily a minimum wage. And again, I'm not a proponent of the state, so
Yeah,
I
well,
don't
you
think that
you
this would be
you
something
may
that we
not
should do. But if
understand.
I were to, like, that would be something that I would say that seems like a maybe a fair thing. Like you can't make more than let's say $1 million per year, and it has to be maybe adjusted to based on one's context and where they live and all of that. But yeah, I think there is to be
Yeah, and
something to
I
be
I
said
don't
about
I don't
that.
want this to sound condescending, but that is because I truly do not mean it that way, but that is spoken by someone who doesn't understand, even healthy ambition. Because what if you put artificial caps, number one, there will be ways, and this is why you cannot do this. There will be ways in which people figure out, including black markets, including all kinds of things that will circumvent and skirt those things. There
I'm
will
sure.
be then governmental pressure There will be people who will get into government and figure out how to adjust those things to their benefit, or how to
And
skirt
I
those
would say,
things.
like, maybe the argument would be make them do that then. Like, make them have to go around
Yeah,
all
but
of
that
these
happens
other
now.
ways,
That
right?
happens
Like,
now.
because
And I'm
and
arguing
you're right, and
against,
you're absolutely right. Like,
right.
yeah, and make, like,
So
I
you
would say
can't be an
make them do that,
anarchist,
right?
because in an anarchist world, right, if you're arguing for that, then all bets are off, bro. And potentially what we have is, private warlords and everything else, and people will become just as wealthy, but I think arguably even more powerful, to privately powerful, in an anarchist society, versus one where we have some kind of limited government structure.
Yeah, again, and maybe, and again, I'm not a proponent of this, again, because this would require some sort of state
No,
intervention,
and
and I'm just not a
listen,
fan
this
of
is
it. Right,
fun.
right,
This is fun to
right,
have
right.
these discussions.
But here again, like, I think, to just go back, right? You made the argument about, figuring out what's enough, right? I just look back to Acts 2. This early church, some of those people had more wealth than others, but they all came together and said, "We're going to make sure everybody has enough." And they all collectively decided that because they believed that Jesus, as their Messiah, demanded that of them. And I just think, like, what if we just created a world, and what if the church was an example of that, of making sure that everybody has enough, and that there isn't somebody who's going to be able to make more money than they could possibly give away? Like, what if
Yeah,
we
well, we're
just
called.
created a world of that? And you're saying it's idealistic or whatever, and maybe it is. But guess what? Uh, I think loving your neighbor as yourself can sometimes be a little idealistic as well. But guess what? We're still demanded as Christians to do that
Oh, I
because
don't
that's what
disagree.
Jesus told us to, right?
I
And
don't
so,
disagree.
regardless if it's idealistic or not, like, yeah, it might not fully happen. The kingdom of God is not fully realized, but it still doesn't mean that we shouldn't pursue it.
Yeah, listen, I don't disagree with that. The
Right.
difference is, like, you somewhat, and again, dude, I love you. I'm not hammering you in a bad way, but you're talking a little bit out of both sides of your mouth. You want to be an anarchist, right? You envision that, but yet the things that you're suggesting only work if it's completely voluntary, and
Yeah, that's part of
in the
anarchism.
practical world that we live in, it will not happen. So I don't see how, given the practical world that we live in, that is filled with sin. And believe me, man, I want a revival for Jesus, that I want everybody to come around more to your way of thinking, where it's voluntary exchange, right? The socialists
Right.
want, at the point of a government gun, for the government to come and take the money, and then they want to distribute it as they see fit, right? The biblical model is we together, corporately together, give, both individually and as a group, to the causes that God calls us to, feeding and caring for the widows and the children, caring for our neighbors, all those sort of things we should be doing, but it's all a voluntary exchange, not a state mandated dictate.
100%. Totally agree. And I think that the love of God is powerful enough to make that happen in the world. Yeah,
Well,
there's going to
yes,
be people,
eventually.
right? There's sin in the world. People aren't going to be fully doing that, right? And yet, I still think the power of the love of God is more powerful than their ability to sin and screw it all up.
Hey,
I fundamentally believe that. I
well,
absolutely believe that.
well, brother, I respect that. I mean, I do. I respect your thought. I respect your ambition when it comes to these things, and what you want. But I think that your position that you hold and what you throw out online, gets wildly consistent, or inconsistent. And and you want to, I saw a post that you did the other day, where you took Joel Webbin, and he had a comment. His tweet was, "Christians must recover the lost virtue of hatred. If not, Christianity will survive, but the West will be finished." And your response was, a lot of Christians are like, "What if we believe the exact opposite of what Jesus said?" And yet, all over scriptures, we are commanded to hate sin. So hatred in and of itself is not. So you're either, uh, again, doing this to be provocative, or you're not looking at what Joel Webbin was meaning. There's what people mean, right? Which, in a conversation between you and I, when it's not online, Like I'm listening to what you're intending. I'm teasing it out for clarity, and then we're addressing it. You know that Joel Webbin is not calling for us to hate people,
Yeah, but
but
that's
you're
where I
making it
actually do
suggest
think
that
he
way.
is. Like, I
What?
do think he is. Like, yeah, so my issue, like, just from a front-facing value, like, um, I don't think that this sort of virtue of hate or whatever, like, I could, yeah, there's plenty of times where Jesus, commanded, hate your parents, yada, 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 yada. Right. Like, I get that. Right. And I don't disagree. Like, I think we should hate evil. I think we should hate oppression. Right. I totally agree with that. It's the West part of it, where he talks about the potential falling of the Western civilization kind of thing. That is the part where I'm like, "Oh, this is what you actually mean by hate." And that's the part where I think that's actually the opposite of what Jesus taught. And so it's not just the fact that, like, he thinks of this virtue of hate, but that he thinks that if we don't hate the right people, then the Western civilization will fall. And that's the part where I'm like, yeah, that's where we're going overboard. So that's the part where I really disagree with him.
Okay. All right. Is it because so you're uncomfortable with his characterization of the West? Because I think if the West falls, uh, Christianity will fall in many places. Now, I don't think that the West equals Christianity, but it is a bulwark of protection for
Yeah, there's
Christians
more
all over the
Christians in the
world.
world now that are in the not West than there are in the West. So I just don't buy that argument at all. There are more Christians outside of the West than there are in the West now. I mean, Christianity is really actually declining rapidly in the West, and so I
What's
don't
it being
buy that
replaced by?
argument that it would fall apart. And also, Christianity has survived multiple empires across all of the
Sure.
world for 2,000 years. Like, I don't think it's going anywhere,
So
and
you
it
don't
certainly
think
isn't reliant on the West. Christianity
you
existed
don't
before
think the
Western
West.
civilization, and it will exist after.
All right, so let me pause it. My thesis here is the West was uniquely blessed because it was built upon Christian values. It was built upon Christian precepts and principles. Now it has certainly, like everything else that was, every government, every structure, built by man, eventually, becomes rife with sin, and so it has its life cycle. But the West did more good than bad in the world and brought more people out of poverty based upon those principles than any other society that has ever existed. And it failing will be a bad thing because it's going to be replaced, like it is right now in Europe, by Islam. And I have a real issue with that.
Sure. I mean, I guess we'll wait and see. I just like again, Christianity has survived multiple civilizations, multiple empires. It will
Well,
continue to
sure.
survive, and I just like, yeah. Now, if you think the West was some sort of unique thing that just made the world so much better, like, yep, sure. Like, a lot of people thought the Roman Empire was probably that, and it fell. And guess what? Humanity's still here. We're still doing the thing. A lot of us are still Christians. Like, I just like this sort of doomsday approach of it. I'm like, nah. We've gone through worse. I just think we have.
Yeah, well, certainly we have, but does that mean we should? Does that mean that a revival in the West, where we return to those
What
founding
is even like
principles?
what is the West? Like, what do you mean by the West? Like, what is the values of that? What are the structures, the institutions? Like, what is the West? That part is, to me, what I can tell you what I think of when I hear West, but I'm actually really curious about the people who are proponents of it. Like, what do they actually mean by this?
Well,
So
I
I'm
mean,
curious for
I
you.
said it in my opening thesis there. It is, I mean, a governmental understanding and system, built upon the foundation of Scripture. Our republic.
So is Ethiopia the West? Like, is Ethiopia part of the West? Because they're some of the earliest Christians and developed their society around the earliest forms of Christianity. Is Ethiopia part of the West then? Or is Ethiopia exempt, or are they an exception? Like, I'm just it
Well,
doesn't make
Ethiopia
sense to me when
is not characterized as a Western or Christian nation now. I mean, saying
but
that
they were some, and they still
all
are
of
the earliest.
Wait,
society that was built on Christianity.
almost all of the Middle East were Christian nations that now no longer exist.
But Ethiopia is still very predominantly Christian.
Well,
Yeah, so why aren't they
there's some
considered the West? Like
arguments that
they were right. So that's what I'm saying. Like it seems like the West is just Western Europe. Is that what it
no, no,
entails
no. I
then?
mean, we would be the West. It's all of the governments and
Yeah, but
everything that was
initially,
spawned
yeah, I understand America is a
based
part of
on
that, but
Christian principles.
initially it was Western Europe that then eventually came over to the America. I get that part.
Correct. Yeah, I mean,
So
it
America
was
and
the
Western Europe
society that
then?
was based upon the Greek thought and Christianity, Greek philosophy and Christianity in its unique combination brought us the governmental systems and things that were consistent with. I mean, anytime you are doing things that are consistent with biblical principles, there's a blessing that comes along with that. And we have enjoyed those blessings, many of which we've abandoned, and we're seeing the fallout of that now.
So
That's my position.
So which Christianity too, by the way? Is it like are you it seems like you're a really big fan of Catholicism and the way that Catholics did that all across the Western Europe and especially the way that they then brought the West to other parts of the world as well. Like is it Catholicism that you're advocating for or is it Protestantism? I'm just curious like how
Well,
you're differentiating that.
all of the above have roots within the Christian system. You
Right.
understand? They all have
So but
both
which
the
one
corruption of
maybe
mankind. No, no, it's not that simple because also like what I said there is there's Greek thought and principles that play into the narrative of Western values and our governmental systems that are also, by the way, many of those things are not inconsistent with scriptural wisdom, but it's all of that that makes up the West, which has a very complex and yet rich history that includes the sinful nature of mankind. So we can't escape all of that. But what you're arguing is the West is a bad thing, and and
I
and
mean,
and
I
you're
don't know if it's
okay
a
to
bad thing
see.
or I think it's
And
pretty
well,
amoral. Like
are
I think
you?
it's morally neutral. I don't think it's good nor bad. It's just
Oh
it
no,
has
yeah,
existed.
you and I would argue about that. What do you think of Islam and its rise, including here in the United States or in Texas? I just did a show about what's going on in Texas, where they're taking over and creating their own cities that will be run by Sharia law, because that's where we're heading all over the West right now.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I know of Christian nationalists that are doing that too, especially in Idaho right now. So, I
Well,
mean,
that's where I
yeah,
live, and
I think it's wrong for if there are Muslims that are doing that. I'm sure there are. I think it's wrong for them to do it, and I think it's just as wrong when Christian nationalists do that as well. Like,
yeah.
I
Well,
think both are
if
in the
you're
wrong.
gonna argue this, man, I suggest that you follow what's happening in Western Europe and what's happening in the cities that are
I live
being
in
taken
Minneapolis,
over
like, I
wholesale
live
by
around a
Islam.
lot of Muslims, a lot of them are my neighbors, they're alright,
Sure.
they're just people doing their thing, just trying to make it to the next day, like, yeah, are there probably bad Muslims out there that are just, taking, their faith and making a very, like, fundamentalist version of it? Yeah, and I grew up in I grew up in evangelicalism, I know what fundamentalist Christianity is like too, and so I just, like, don't see them being all that different, but at the end of the day, like, I think most Christians are just normal people just trying to get through life, just in the same way a lot of Muslims are as well.
Mm.
And again,
Yeah.
I'm friends with many of them here in Minneapolis, a lot of Somali folks. So,
Sure, sure, and they're performing in some of those neighborhoods, clitorectomies on young girls. Are you okay with that? Is that just them getting along? Because where
I
they
mean, I've
start to
never heard of
dominate,
that
they bring
happening in
in.
Minneapolis. I mean,
w-
I'll
uh,
be honest, I feel like Minneapolis is the kind of place you'd hear about that. Never heard about that. I can assure you that if that was happening, like I would be the first that would try to prevent that from happening, and whatever means that I can do that. But yeah, I just haven't heard any outcry about that. And
are
yeah,
you okay with Sharia law replacing ours involuntarily in cities?
of course not.
Okay. All right. Well, we're
Yeah,
getting
like, I
somewhere.
don't think just in the same way, I don't think that whatever the Christian version of that should be replacing, the very clear, separation of church and state as well. Like,
Okay. All right. All right. So
I
give me
don't
an
think any
example of what that
religion
looks
should be
like
doing that.
in a because you mentioned Idaho, and I'm assuming you mean North Idaho or the
Yeah.
Moscow mood. So tell me what that looks like,
Yeah, I
and
mean,
tell me where the
they're
similarities are.
yeah, I mean, they oppress women. Women are only allowed to do certain things, right? They only have certain roles, and so I think both groups of people are doing that, and men
Well, give
are
me an
in
example
control of
of
everything,
that.
right? What's that?
Give me an example of that.
Uh, I mean, women are in these sort of Christian nationalist circles. Women are only to be housewives and bearing children and raising children. That is their role. They couldn't own businesses. They can't they can't do certain sort of political tasks. They are strictly only allowed to be working in the home. And from my understanding, again, I don't know the fundamentalist Muslim community very well, but my understanding is they relegate women to the same kind of status as well. And so, I
Yeah,
just
I
don't
think you
think
have
that
a
that's a
misunderstanding
particularly
there.
great way to live in the world.
Yeah, I think you have a misunderstanding there because again, actually go and I'm not a
So
reformed
you're
guy, but I go and I spend time. I've been on shows up there in that very area, and no, the women own businesses. Women, I mean, one of the most
Doug
popular
Wilson would
podcasts.
allow a woman becoming like the
His
mayor of a
daughter
town?
has a super popular podcast and business. His
Would
own
she be
daughter.
allowed to be the mayor of the town that they live in Moscow? Would she be allowed to?
It's not a question of being allowed to.
Yeah,
I
no, no,
mean,
no, no, like,
they
no, no,
run for
that's
political
no,
office.
it is
Women run
very
for
much the
political
question of
office.
what women are allowed to do and what they're not allowed to
Women
do. So
run for
would
political
would
office
Doug
in North
Wilson's
Idaho.
daughter be allowed to, just simply be allowed to run for mayor?
I've not asked her specifically if that's her ambition, but you posited that they couldn't own businesses, and they
Uh,
do.
well, it's good to know that they I news to me.
I think
I just
you're
assumed that
arguing
I
against the
thought they were
caricature
only
of
allowed to
something.
be
No, you're arguing
to
against the
be working
caricature.
in the home.
No, you're
So that
arguing against the caricature that
great.
you
Well,
you
that I'm happy to know that Doug Wilson is a big fan of women owning businesses. I actually I'm really surprised. I had no idea.
I had Sabbath dinner with him and his entire family, including his daughters and his sons and son-in-laws, and they're great folks. They come
Yeah, I
down
mean,
here and they have
and again, I don't
they
know.
do events at my cigar lounge here in the Boise area.
Cool. Yeah, I don't know Doug Wilson particularly well, but I know people in those circles that have advocated for taking away women's right to vote. So I don't know if that's
Well,
a
that's only
position that
because they
Doug.
messed it up. That's only
Oh,
because they messed it
so
up.
women aren't. So are like. Let me ask you this then. Do you think women should be allowed to vote?
Let me share with you a funny story along
I
those
feel like that's a
lines.
simple yes or no, but all right.
No. Let me give me an opportunity to share a fun
Fair enough.
story.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Fair
Okay.
enough.
So I did a podcast that we called the Unhinged episode, where we had some cigars and bourbon, and we filmed it late into the evening, and we talked about like what could get us canceled on both sides, and we were joking on the podcast about this, and we threw out the idea of, oh well, let's get rid of the 19th Amendment. And again, joking around, having fun with it. I don't think we should get rid of the 19th Amendment, although I do think men and women approach voting differently, and we've seen that in recent elections to where women have even voted for their own destruction. It's interesting though, after that episode, the women, wives, girlfriends around us were like, oh no, that didn't bother us all. We screwed it up. Maybe we shouldn't have. And we're not talking about Christian nationalist fundamentalists caricatures of that. We're talking about successful women who have a appropriate view of submission and all of that. We're not talking about the extreme that you're using as a caricature, but there are reasonable arguments to be made that there should be household votes. There should be a better structure. I don't think a lot of people should be voting. Forget women. I think there is a tremendous amount of manipulated people that have no clue what they're voting for. They're just voting for stuff. They're just voting for whoever's going to give them things, and they couldn't tell you. They couldn't pass a basic civics test in the United States of America. And so I think that we have a responsibility to look at it in its entirety. We've corrupted and bankrupted this country by the politicians manipulating people that don't have the ability to or the education, and I mean just practical education, to understand what they're even voting for, and they've voted themselves money from the treasury and bankrupted us. So if we're going to talk in the grander context of things, I think it's more complex than that. But I think you're arguing against a caricature of Christian nationalism, and I am not a Christian nationalist myself, and I think that there's such thing as a woke right that is out there using Marxist techniques to try to make themselves the masters over us. I didn't want left-wing masters, and I don't want right-wing masters. So more of this is complex than you and I can cover in the next 5 minutes here.
No masters, but you do think women should be fully submissive to men.
Well, I mean, what does that mean? Because
Well,
there's a
you're just saying that
caricature.
there should be a household vote rather than women having their own vote, right? So that sounds like one example of submission.
Well,
So
I mean, because if I said that, like a household vote, right, could mean that household includes man and woman. Household could also include a single man. Household could also include a single woman. So,
right. But for a
there's
woman
a
that's married, then it would be just one household gets the vote, right? And so she would have to be submissive to her husband's vote, or what, obviously likely would be her husband's vote.
Well, no, because okay, so that's a very simplistic, oppressive view of what that verse says, and I don't believe that verse says that. The verse, and it's more complex than it is made to be by people on your side or on the far right side. A family, a husband and wife relationship should be a team. It should be team that, just like in a business, if you have the CEO and the COO, they're both incredibly powerful positions, and they should be listening to each other, and they should be, sharing intelligence with one another, sharing roles. God gives gifts to women that He doesn't give to men, and vice versa. God gives masculine gifts to women that He may not always give to the man in the relationship. Some men tend to be more feminine in how they approach things and decision making, and vice versa. So
Sure.
it's more complex than that. But according to that scripture, it's a biblical responsibility, and it's a biblical accountability. The man is in a position of answering to the board of directors as the CEO, and he's going to take the brunt of the consequences for the bad decision making and the consequences for all of that, than the COO would. And that would be true of that kind of a relationship. I mean, again, that's the I think a fair analogy. It doesn't mean that one is less than the other. It's just a accountability order. It means that the man his head is going to be on the chopping block, and the CEO is usually the first to get fired if the performance of the entity doesn't work.
Sure, but you don't necessarily believe that women have to submit to every one of their man's decisions or something. So even if she might disagree with a decision that affects the household, she still has to submit to it. Like, do you think that's
Well, I
part of
think
that?
it's more complex than that. That's not what the scripture even says. It's an accountability structure. There is
Right.
somebody who's going to be the decider in a relationship at the end of the day, when it comes down to it.
And it always be the man? Should it not? Like,
Well, again, you're talking in incredibly simplistic terms that are the same simplistic terms the people who are truly oppressing women use
mhm,
on the other side of that argument.
right.
And that is certainly not the picture. If Christ is to be dying for his bride, the church, then how easy is it to submit in a relationship that's like that, versus one where it's somebody who's not willing to lay down and die and sacrifice themselves.
Right. But we just mentioned it a bit ago that, maybe there's some rethinking of how we should do the 19th Amendment, because you're thinking that, women have really screwed this up. But what I'm not hearing though is, well, maybe as a man, I should maybe bear my cross and submit to that. Right. Like, but it seems like it's only a one-way street based on how at least you're
No,
articulating your policies.
no. Very
Or
clearly, I'm not. Very clearly, I'm not saying one way street. I'm saying it's a far more complex issue than what the far left or the far right has made it. And there are people, and when I say the far right, I mean there's people who would love nothing more than to oppress people. On that side, there's the left who would like nothing more than to oppress people on the other side. So all of that's wrong and distinctly not Christ-like.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a person that I don't think I want men. I certainly don't want men to be oppressed, and I certainly don't want women to be oppressed. I want
Fair.
us to. I think that's why I think it's good that women have the same amount of power in their vote as a man does. Like I think that's important because
Well,
I
and
don't want either one to be
I'm
oppressed.
not even suggesting. I'm suggesting that there's something wrong with our system as a whole, because we have allowed. I'm far more interested in having the poorly people with poor discernment or people who are easily manipulated. I'm wanting to have some barriers, and I'll say that quite loudly. I think there should be barriers to voting that people have to pass through, including just basic civics
Yeah,
requirements.
we used to do that for Black people, by the way, too. Like we would require them to take tests, and then
We should
they
do it
would
for all
often fail
people.
them.
Yeah, but
And
that would
we
be
failed them, and the reason
racist.
for that was because even though they now had the rights to vote, now we were gonna make it really hard for them to vote. So
Yeah, well,
we've done that before.
that would be racist and oppressive in a different way, and that's obviously clearly wrong.
So you think there's a way to do that that wouldn't possibly be whether it's racist or classist
If you don't
or
know who
sexist,
you
so you
are,
don't think there's any way that that could possibly turn into that way of we're gonna only let the certain people who might pass this test to be a certain kind of person. You don't think that could possibly happen?
well, I think there's all things that could happen on all kinds of scenarios, but no, I do not think that it's a problem having requiring a basic understanding of English. I don't think there's a problem of having a basic understanding of our system and form of government. I mean, again, you listen to people and they think that we're a democracy, and most people don't understand the electoral college and why that allows South Dakota to have to still have power. And it would be fundamentally unfair for the Dakotas if we went away from the electoral system, and somebody in New York would be deciding what you guys need and what your industry needs and what your state needs. And that wasn't the agreement when our states became a united republic of states.
For sure. I mean, again, as an
Yeah.
anarchist, I'm all about localism as much as possible. So
Well, there you
I'm not
go.
gonna.
Well,
I don't have any disagreement there.
how we preserve that is by requiring a basic understanding. And I'm not talking about a high level understanding. I'm saying, I mean, most people, I mean, you see it when they do man on the street videos and things. Most people are easily manipulated, and the more we control for that, the better outcomes we will have. And we should have responsibilities as citizens when it comes to our votes and how we're expressing them.
Yeah, I mean, again, I could be open to the idea of, because I've thought about this too with like the legal drinking age. I mean, I think it's one of those things where if you have a high school diploma, that probably means that you're responsible enough, at least, to have a drink. Maybe there could be an argument there about, if you have a high school diploma, that would then not just the age of 18, but have a high school diploma, that maybe is what gives you the right to vote. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, I
Yeah,
just don't. I would
I
be
think there'd
really, I think
be.
it'd be really hard pressed if we like start creating some sort of test that test wouldn't be a way to take the at least the voting power of some people away. That is a certain group of
Yeah, but
people
we
that we
do
don't
it.
want to
We
have that voting
require it
power.
for people who become citizens. So if you go through the citizen process, okay, legal
Yeah.
citizen
And I'll be
process.
honest, every one of those people, they know way more about U.S.
Yeah,
history than I probably even
yeah,
do, and
yes.
certainly know more about the U.S. history than even 99% of the population does, and that
Yeah, and
includes a
that's
lot
a
of
problem.
conservatives too, by the way.
But that's a problem. You realize, Mason, that's why we have lost our American identity which was healthy. And I don't think and maybe you think that our once like our fundamental American values are unhealthy, but I don't think so. I think they were great. I think they were wonderful. We are super unique as a country, that we had people come here who wanted to become an American, and we erased most racism over time compared to the rest of the world by having a shared American identity and having it not based on ethnicity, and having it based on anybody can come here to share our values regardless of your race, regardless of your ethnicity. And we went away from that, and we're now sitting together in a world that lost some of that fundamental strength because we abandoned the requirement about in the 1960s. It started going away. For coming here to the United States, you used to have that
Like during
shared
the civil rights
identity.
movement, kind of that era is when it started going bad.
No, it was really Ted Kennedy.
Okay.
And it had changed in our immigration status. It changed in our immigration law. And our immigration law started to abandon the idea that immigration isn't for the immigrants principally. It's for the country. It is to strengthen us, and it's to ensure that we have a shared identity. And we fundamentally began to go away from those things. And again, it was Teddy Kennedy that was kind of the driver of some of those changes, and it fundamentally hurt us. And that's why we're more divided than we ever have been.
I mean, I don't really know what those sort of shared values or shared identity, what like the characteristics of those would be even. But I mean, if we're, this is the other reason why I'm not a big fan of the sort of like, we are so polarized. Like we literally fought a war over whether or not a black person should be owned or not. Like we have been so divided at certain moments in our country. Like I don't like go into this sort of
Yeah, but
hysteria. We're
that was
more
because of
divided now. We're not.
Christianity. That was because of Christianity. I mean, the West is the first, and the West meaning us and Western Europe, are the first to get rid of slavery, which still exists. More people are enslaved today
Mhm.
than ever have been. And it has largely disappeared here in the West because of Christianity. And that's why when I'm arguing for
Right. It was
Western
caused by
greatness,
it
that's it.
and resolved by it largely
No,
as
it was
well.
not caused by it. That's a foolish statement, brother. That's the
Is
first
there
foolish statement you've said this entire time.
the slave masters in the South weren't Christians, are you saying?
No,
Do you know why it's called the Southern Baptist
slavery
Convention, right?
predates American
Yeah,
Christianity.
and guess who who owned a lot of slaves? Like Catholics owned a lot of slaves, right? Like, so it's not as if like,
Are
in fact, actually, there's an
who
incredible book. I highly recommend it, by Willie Jennings, and it talks about the origins of slavery and really specifically the origins of race and how Christianity contributed to it. Highly recommend it if you want to learn more about it. But like this idea that like Christians weren't directly involved with the slave trade is just like
Oh,
nonsensical.
I'm not saying that. Of
Right.
course
So
I'm not saying
Christians
that.
were very much a part of the slave trade. And you're absolutely right. There are many Christians, a lot of the Quakers, especially, a lot of the Methodists, especially Northern Methodists, were a part of the abolition of slavery. It doesn't have to be this like
It was
Christians
fundamentally,
solved
the
it, as if
abolition of
Christians
slavery
all
was
weren't a part of it too.
fundamentally rooted in Christianity. For you to
Sure.
argue, there's people that justify in the name of Christ all kinds of evil things. In fact, that is the unforgivable sin, is doing evil under his banner. I mean,
Yeah. A lot
that's
of
what that
Christian slave
commandment.
owners were doing just that.
That's Yeah, yeah. But you're not getting me to give them a pass. But you cannot on one side ignore that it's particularly Christian values that sowed the seeds, even within our own government documents. It sowed the seeds intentionally
Yeah, yeah.
to break
And I'm
up
fine.
slavery.
Again, I'm totally fine with you making the argument that Christianity was directly involved, and because of Christian values is why slavery was abolished. 100% on board with that. As long as it's also balanced with Christianity was directly involved in the creation of at least modern day chattel slavery.
No,
And
Christians doing evil
Christians were, and
were.
they, but you don't think they
That's
were
not
making
Christianity.
arguments? You don't think they were making arguments for why it was justified based out of their Christian values?
Well, sure.
They were
People
absolutely
do
doing
that
that.
all the
And
time.
again, Willie Jennings talks all about this. It's highly
But people
recommended.
do that all the time, Mason.
Yeah, for sure.
People justify
Now
all kinds of
we
things
can disagree. We
using
can argue
Christianity.
about whether or not it should be true or not. But like to say that as if they weren't arguing that out of their Christian values, I think we need to balance both. There were Christians that were arguing out of their Christian values to abolish slavery, and there were Christians based on their supposed Christian values that were
Yeah, but
arguing
one is
for slavery.
Christianity and one is not. One is Christian values and one is
Right.
not.
Now, again,
Right.
we can totally, you're absolutely right.
And
Now, but to
let me
say that they
contrast that
weren't, though,
because Islam has no such issue with slavery. It wasn't the Islamic states that were getting rid of slavery worldwide. In fact, it's the Islamic states that continue to have slavery right now, because it's a fundamental difference between the underpinnings of the and foundational theology of the religions.
yeah, I mean, I'm not going to do the whataboutism of Islam because
Well,
I'm
why
not
not?
Muslim. It's not.
Are,
I'm not. I'm going to stay in my lane.
are you
I know
afraid
my
of getting
lane.
in trouble in Minneapolis?
No. I'm not worried about them. But no. Here's the thing. Like about me. Like if there's something I really don't know about, a lot about, I'm just not going to comment on it because
Yeah,
I don't know a
appreciate
lot
that.
about it. And
I
Islam is
appreciate
one
that.
of those things. I just don't know enough about it to make even a comment for or against. Like so,
Hey, I appreciate that.
it's sort of like this thing where like, yeah, you can make this argument, but honestly, I just have no comment on it because
Mason,
I don't know
that's
enough about it.
respectable. That's respectable, brother. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. Hey, well,
I don't
listen,
know.
man.
I don't know enough about astrophysics. Astrophysics to make a comment on it. So
Hey,
I'll do the same
amen.
thing.
Amen, man. I appreciate that. I really do. Listen, I appreciate you coming on, brother. We'll have to get together again soon, because I think these conversations where we really do try to seek some clarity on each other's positions, I think it's healthy. I respect you for it. I wish you the best of luck. I want you to have that white picket fence, and I want you to retire with a good 401k at 65, brother. I really do.
That's all I want. I don't need $1 billion though.
All right. Hey, amen. Well, where do we follow you, and how can we support you?
Yeah, you can follow me. I've got a website, masonmennenga.com. There's only one other Mason Mennenga in the world, and he's not on the internet. So if you find a Mason Mennenga in the world, that's me. So yeah, and all my social stuff is on there. So if you want to follow my Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Patreon, whatever you want, it's all there. So it's a one-stop shop.
Awesome. Well, hey, brother, I appreciate you. To God be the glory, and we are out. Hey, thank you for watching or listening to this show. If you are someone who listens to us on the podcast apps, please go to our Rumble channel. Even if you're not going to watch us there, we'd appreciate you hitting subscribe. We want to boost those numbers up and make sure that channel continues to grow. But again, thank you so much for listening to us.